Hey guys, this is Milo, and today I'm going to show you guys how to thin down your axe handle, and I'll talk about the benefits of doing this. I'm first going to mention the materials that you need to use, and the first thing is a vise, and that's so you can secure your axe handle down while you're working on it. And then what you're seeing on the screen now is what I put in between the vise and the handle, and that's so I don't damage it while I'm working on it. And this is a Japanese rasp called a Shinto Rasp, and it can take off a lot of wood in a short period of time, and I really love using this thing. And then I actually recently bought a cabinet maker's rasp, and this is so I can make the palm swell and the shoulders because it has a round side. And then I also use a draw knife once in a while because it can do really delicate work but also take off so much wood at once. This is my small half round rasp, and this is really good for fine work, and it can take off wood on the coarse side if you want to, and it's really cheap. And then here is my Japanese saw. I use this for cutting off wedges in the palm swell, and it works really well. Also, here is my vise, and I put the soft jaws in between the vise, and then I put the handle in. Usually what I do is secure it by the head because I hang my axe and then shape the handle, because that leads for me to not feel as much regret and waste as much time if I actually make a mistake shaping the handle. Usually you want to do the rough work first and then finish off with the fine work. Right now I'm showing you guys how to remove a lot of wood from an axe handle, and this is good because you want some flex. That's going to distribute the shock evenly, and it won't go as much into your arms. This shock could actually cause injury or pain if you're chopping wood for a while. And manufacturers make their handles too thick because bad grain orientation with a thin handle could be pretty weak. If it's straight grain though, it's perfectly fine, and it's usually better than a thick handle in terms of strength. And also, these axe manufacturers don't want to accept so many returns or improve their quality control by a lot. And to shape the handle, you first want to remove material from the top and bottom, and you want to do long full strokes with your rasp or your draw knife, and that's so you're taking off an equal amount of wood throughout the handle, so there's no high spots and low spots. You can see that I'm using a draw knife, and I actually don't usually use them because the rasp are perfectly fine for me, and they're also more beginner friendly because the draw knife can really dig into the grain and completely ruin your handle if you're not skilled enough. The downsides of using a rasp is that it doesn't take off as much material if you want it to, and it also creates some sawdust, so you probably should wear a mask when you're using this. But it also doesn't eat into the grain like a bladed tool does, so it's much easier to use if you're a beginner. And right now I'm using my half round rasp to make a transition from the lower part of the handle to the shoulder. Usually you don't want this transition to be abrupt because that can actually be a weak spot for the axe and it'll probably break there. So you want to round off that transition as much as you can. But I also want enough usable handle that I can slide my handle down, and that'll just give me more leverage. And I'm done shaving off the tops and the bottoms of the handle. You usually want the handle to be an oval, so I'll take more wood off of the sides of the handle than the top and bottom. And to shave down the sides, it's a bit difficult because you can't put it into your normal vise. So I use these bar clamps to clamp down the handle, and the links to all of the tools I'm using will be in the description down below as an Amazon affiliate link. And these clamps, they do secure really well, but my table is wobbly, so I will be replacing my table soon, and this system will work pretty well. And basically, I put it on one side, and then I just start shaving it down with long strokes with my rasp. And I'm basically shaving this into a rectangle because there's just so much wood on this handle, and I want the handle to be pretty thin. Another thing with a thin handle is that if you suck and you overstrike a lot, then you can end up damaging the handle pretty bad. So I usually recommend leaving the top section a little bit thicker than the bottom section if you are a beginner. And right now I'm actually using this thing called a cabinet scraper, which is a piece of metal with like a hooked burr on the end, and that shaves off the wood. And this actually works better than I expected, and I'd highly recommend using these. It works a lot like a spoke shave, which is a carpenter's tool, and this is probably a bit easier to sharpen, and it actually takes off a lot more material than I thought, and it leaves a pretty nice finish. So for this, I'm doing long strokes, and I'm actually stabilizing the other end of the handle with my waist, and that's so I can get the stroke long enough to the palm swell. And this is actually what the shavings from the cabinet scraper looks like. It's a lot nicer than the wood and the sawdust from the rasp, just because you won't be breathing that in. And this step right here is really important. This is what I do before I start rounding the handle off into an oval. And I basically make this an octagon, so I chamfer each corner of the handle. And that makes it so I can keep a consistent angle, which will most likely lead me to not have any bumps and high spots on the handle. I'm also continuing the long strokes once again, and I really enjoy this step because you can actually visibly see if one angle is wrong, and you can kind of match it to the angle on the other side of the handle. One thing that helps me stay consistent when shaping a handle is to only do forward strokes when I'm trying to do precise work. That helps me keep a consistent angle, and then I can actually do forward and back strokes if I'm trying to take off a lot of material at once and I'm comfortable with what I'm doing. And right now I'm rounding off the handle, so as you can see, I'm doing long strokes, and then after each time the rasp reaches the other end of the handle, I kind of shift the angle a little bit, and I'm just working in a back and forth motion so that I'm able to consistently round this off. And this has saved me so much time doing this. It keeps everything so straight and perfect. I don't really have to inspect it with a straight edge afterwards to make sure I'm doing it right. And then you can also see how I'm leaning into this, and I'm getting myself parallel with the handle, so there's no rough transitions from the flat sides to the rounded top. And then also, I'm kind of getting into a motion with my body back and forth with the rasp, and that's helping me not have to reset every time, because if I didn't do this, it probably would waste a lot of time. Also, I'm using my Shinto Rasp the most because it can take off a lot of wood at once, but it doesn't get clogged, and it also leaves a relatively fine finish. And this is because it has holes inside of the rasp part, and it also has spiky saw teeth, kind of different than the normal traditional rasp, which is just kind of like a rough spike. I'm using a half round rasp to shape my palm swell, and if your palm swell is long and thick, then you kind of want to move it backwards towards the end of the handle, because that will hook your hand a lot better. And to shape the palm swell in the shoulders, I actually do a side to side motion, the same thing I did with the longer side of the handle, but for this I just didn't make an octagon at first. For the round work, I'm just using my half round American rasp. I don't think there's a Japanese maker that makes a half round, but that would be really cool because this stuff actually does leave a pretty rough finish compared to the Japanese one, and that's just not really desirable because it's harder to sand out. This is what the handle looks like before sanding, and I use 3M sandpaper. I use a 120 medium grit and then a 180 grit. I usually don't recommend going over 250 because a smooth handle could actually give you blisters. And for the sandpaper, I use a small piece of it and I work it back and forth until there's no more marks from thinning it down. And then I move on to my finer sandpaper to work out the rest of the imperfections. And it will be a bit difficult to sand down the shoulder because I use my American rasp for that, which leaves rougher marks. And then I actually don't sand down the palm swell that much. I leave some of the marks because it can provide some pretty good grip for me. And the last thing that I do is oil the handle. You want to have some kind of hydrophobic oil that soaks into the pores of the wood. And either I recommend Watco Danish oil or linseed oil. Either one's fine. I usually don't recommend anything else like tung oil, just because other oils are more expensive and there's not really any point in using them. The only annoying thing about Watco or linseed oil is that it can spontaneously combust in your rag because it generates heat if it's balled up. Just make sure to dispose of it correctly, and this is the final product. If you guys like this video, then please feel free to like and subscribe. It means a lot, and peace out, guys.